Here's one from Lori. If ASD was on a scale from 1 to 10 being higher functioning, in your experience, do you feel that Aspies are on a sliding scale due to their situation? My son is 10 and an Aspie. I feel that in my son's case, depending on many different factors, he does not stay on the same level of functioning ability. You know, that's what you were just talking about, people being in different environments reacting differently. Better none
right.
has a good day or a bad day. This has been
well, first of all, the entire spectrum is on a sliding scale, and whether a child has a good day versus a bad day depends on one thing: how well their needs are being met that day.
Very well said.
Because if a child is overwhelmed, then their frustration threshold is really small, and it doesn't take them that much to push them over the edge. Because I've heard from parents, well, in this one situation, the child did really well, but in that situation a couple of days later, the child fell apart. Okay, well, was that one context the entirety of your child's day, or do they have experiences leading up to it? Maybe the child didn't have a good night's sleep. Maybe they didn't have enough to eat at breakfast. Maybe there were some other frustrations along the way. It's how well is your child's needs being met, not to mention in what situations in your child's life do they have challenges. If your child's having a wonderful day and they're very easy to get along with and they've been inside all day long where there weren't a whole lot of demands placed upon them socially, they're going to be more laid back. But if you catch them at the end of a school day when they had a hard test and a fire alarm went off and people were bugging them, they're going to come home and they're going to decompress all over you. So whatever their functioning level is has everything to do with what kind of stresses were placed upon them that day or at that moment.
She also asks if you could please define once and for all if Asperger's is indeed part of the autism spectrum, or should it be in a totally different category? Every paraprofessional, professional, and some parents all say different things. Tony Atwood says it's just a matter of spelling. That's how.
Oh yeah.
He says it's just a matter of spelling. What do you think?
Now here's how I clarify the difference. Okay. Asperger's and autism, they have challenges in the same areas. It's just a matter of degree. That's why they call it a spectrum. They have differences in areas of speech processing. Even though a person can articulate, it doesn't mean that they auditorily process the same way. Because I have a little guy, 3 years old, who is very articulate but has auditory processing issues, which means he doesn't hear the language the same way other people do. So if you have Asperger's and you can speak articulately but have language processing issues, then you kind of still have language issues, whereas somebody with autism may have more easily defined speech issues because maybe they're nonverbal or are slow to speak. They have difficulties with organization, with sensory issues. Again, a matter of degree, but they're in the same areas. From autism to PDD to Asperger's, they're all challenges in the same area, just a matter of degree. And one thing I want to clarify, too, is I strongly encourage people to take the notion of high functioning and low functioning out of their vocabulary. Because when you're talking about individuals, who on earth are you comparing them to? So how can you say one is more high functioning than another? Because they have their own unique sets of strengths and challenges. So they are at their level of functioning. When you create an IEP, you don't look at how they compare to other students. You look at what their strengths are so you can build on them. You look at what their challenges are so you can help support them in improving those areas. You don't define an IEP according to how they compare to everybody else. So I say there are about 40 million spectrumites on the planet Earth. You got 40 million points on that spectrum. You don't have high points or low points. You just have points. They're just people. That's how I look at it.
Great. Debbie from Spring Hill, Florida, has this to say. Brian, thank you for such a positive and very informative webinar. I'm sure I speak for everyone on this call tonight about what a great resource this is for everyone who has been touched by Asperger syndrome. This is my 4th webinar and look forward to many more. I hope you will be back. You're an inspiration to us all.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Here's a couple more questions. There are so many questions. I'm just picking a few more because of the time now. Can you recommend a psychiatrist that is familiar or versed in Asperger's in Michigan near Clinton, maybe Ann Arbor?
Well, I'm not familiar with too many resources outside of Illinois, but I'd recommend a couple websites that you can go to. One is grasp.org, G-R-A-S-P. Another one is mapservices.org. It's map spelled with two A's, M-A-A-P services.org. They have national listings of professionals in many different states. So I don't know if they're necessarily in all 50 states, but they would have a lot more resources throughout the country than I have access to. And the resources that you find on either one of those sites, you can bank on, because I know they don't just list anybody in their databases.
Okay, great. Here's one from Laura in Townsend. She says, do you recommend that a counselor or teacher speak to their class about a student on the spectrum who is in that class to help them understand, or is it better to just address issues as they come up?
I would recommend that part of the curriculum in any classroom be about respecting difference in general. Differences in neurology, differences in gender, differences in race, so that it becomes part of just the understanding in the classroom that we are different from each other and we need to be respected for our differences and embraced in our differences. Because if you single out characteristics of one child, unfortunately you don't know how that information is going to be utilized, because you're going to have little jerks in every classroom who, when you're trying to enlighten them, will identify exactly who you're talking about and will use it as an opportunity to exploit that child. So it makes much more sense to just talk about diversity as a whole.
I think that's really the right way to go about things. You're absolutely right. Nancy from Red Lodge, Montana. Brian, thanks for your time tonight. After learning my son has high-functioning autism, and after learning more about autism, I suspect that men in my family are uncertified and on the spectrum. My brother has two sons, one 14 months and one a newborn. How do I, or should I, help prepare him and his wife for the possibility of raising two possible Aspies? They are both too young to diagnose, and my brother does not know he has Asperger's. Thank you.
Well, the one way that you can introduce to the brother the possibility he's on the spectrum is if you identified it in yourself or you have identified it in somebody else, just educate him about that other person. And just say, very innocently, hey, have you ever, heard anybody like this? Or, have heard of anybody who acts this way? Do you know anybody like this? And just give him opportunities to look at himself a little bit. Because some people aren't going to be as receptive to say, hey, I read this article and it sounds just like you, and it has Asperger's on top. Some people will be offended by that. They'll be shocked. But if you kind of come at it more subtly, you give them a chance to reflect on it and kind of process it themselves. That's the way that we introduced it to my father. When we found out about Zachary and then about myself, my mom started talking to him about Zachary and about me, and he literally said, you know what, I think I have that too. Because he came to the conclusion on his own, because it was introduced to him in a non-threatening way. So that's the best way, I think, to approach this gentleman with it.
Right, so that they can accept it more readily.
Oh, yeah, and take it in doses instead of being hit over the head with it.
Ann Dolan from Stockton. My son was diagnosed with Asperger's 8 months ago. He has a severe auditory processing disorder and a severe expressive language disorder. He is in the 2% for speech for kids his age. He's age 9. Will his language grow as he gets older? I thought you couldn't have a severe language delay and have Asperger's. That is why his psychiatrist says he has PDD-NOS due to the speech delay, and our doctor says it's Asperger's with speech delay.
Well, technically, and this, of course, is a problem with the criteria, because the way the DSM-4 is written, technically, a speech delay on the spectrum is autism, because you typically don't find speech delay listed as criteria for PDD or Asperger's. It's specifically for autism. So it's kind of interesting how the diagnostician reached their conclusions. But in terms of a speech delay or speech issue improving over time, that has everything to do with how much work is done with the child. and it's probably going to require a lot of intensive speech services. My middle boy, who's very intelligent, has a speech delay, still has some difficulty speaking. He was given the label of autism because of his speech delay. He also has a whole host of academic challenges. But, yeah, also has auditory processing, expressive receptive language issues. So with him, it's just a matter of giving him opportunities to get the speech support, giving him the opportunities to speak, to talk to you, to be listened to let him hear you, read books to him, introduce his brain to language, get him exposed to it in a very non-threatening, very supportive way. Because you basically have to teach the brain to do what it has difficulty doing, but do it in a way that's very nurturing and supportive. But you're definitely going to need those direct services of speech and language services to really help address it in a more specific way.
Ryan, this has been really great. I think that's about all the time we have for